For quite a long time, my academic work has been asking one very simple question, which is what can prosperity possibly mean on a finite planet? Our conventional answer to that is prosperity is about money, it's about income, it's about wealth. As the economy gets bigger and bigger, we have a bigger impact on the planet, and that's undermining the prosperity of future generations.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Mind Valley Book Club interview series. I'm still being nomadic, as you can see. This is a very old background from many shows ago when I was doing my shows at home. I'm actually enjoying doing it at home. It's not AI, it's real. I could throw something and you'll figure out it's real. But welcome to Mind Valley Book Club. Welcome to my weekly interviews. I have a guest as usual today. I mean, I wouldn't go on an interview if you didn't have a guest. And what's very unique is I have an actual book with me, which is such a rare pleasure. I think in my 2 years, I've only held a few books in my hands, mostly because we are trying to be current, up to date, interview books very quickly. So we don't always get to enjoy the actual book. Just if you're watching it in recording, which is majority of you guys, you're still welcome to interact with us. I know it's it's not live if you're watching it in recording, but it's still important. It's still relevant, and I think communication transcends space and time. So keep commenting. And my guest today is Tim Jackson. Welcome, Tim, to Mind Valley.
It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm really pleased to be with you, Kristina.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you. And I'm also very pleased that we have very similar backgrounds. That's a good sign, I think. And I'll make a little casual introduction as usual. So Tim Jackson is environmental economist. He's also professor emeritus in the University of Surrey and the author of several books. I would also want to say award-winning author, award-winning dramatist. Some of your books have actually been named the Book of the Year by Financial Times?
Financial Times, yeah.
Yes, and one of them was actually even named the Book of the Decade.
The economics book of the decade, so
Economics book.
maybe not absolutely the best of all books, but as an economics book, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a decade. And
Right.
the newest book, Care Economy, is what we're going to be talking about. I did send you an email on Friday, so hopefully you grab the book. I know from some of the questions that came from you, some of you have read actually previous books by Tim Jackson. So this is amazing. So you have some loyal readers here in the audience. Interesting part about your bio is also that you are a dramatist, award-winning dramatist, and you've written some scripts, I guess, for BBC Radio, right?
Yeah, I started out actually as a BBC radio dramatist, and so it's been a part of my life from quite early on. That idea of telling stories.
And my favorite type of books, this is one of them, is where academic knowledge and background are combined with good writing. Because those of you who know me for a long time, I'm still a huge fan of classical literature, of beautiful language, of actually reading and enjoying the process and taking it as a journey. So this book, The Care Economy, yes, it is going to be about economics. Although Tim does say it's a book for people who love economics and book for people who hate economics, who understand it and who don't speak the language. It is about care, obviously care as well. We'll probably go deeper to define it. I don't want to butcher the meaning. But in addition to that, it's a journey. Yeah, I know you also mentioned it's a little bit of a travelogue because it does reflect the places and the experiences of your life. So this is a very brief intro. Did I leave something out of your bio? Because I'm trying to do it by memory, so I am not always very meticulous about every single detail. So
that's all good. That's all good. And the the journey of the book, as you say, for me, this was a very different book. The previous books that some of the audience might have come across, the first one that drew public attention, at any rate, was a book called Prosperity Without Growth. And it was written very differently from this. It was written actually initially as a report to the UK government, and it was written in a much more academic style. And so one of the things that shifts between that earlier work and this work is me allowing the playwright inside me to come out a little bit more. And so it is, as you say, almost like a kind of travelogue or a travel novel or something. And that's deliberate to be able to draw people who wouldn't normally address these arguments into what I think is a really, really important debate. So it's a kind of deliberate stylistic shift in this particular book.
Mm. And you will actually figure it out from the start. I actually was a bit puzzled in the beginning, but that was a good puzzlement. When I even if you look at the contents, which is I wonder if you guys see it, which actually comes with little paragraphs of stories, what you're going to discover or what a chapter is about, including the prologue. Everything is so unusual that you are a little bit puzzled. I am happy that you did that. It does. I mean, it does make a difference. So you say that your goal was to draw in the people who are maybe not interested in the topic itself. In retrospect, did you get a lot of feedback from your publisher and your editors? Was it hard to fight? Because I've read so many self-help books, or well, non-fiction books. It is very unusual. So how did you fight for
Yeah.
the right to be true to yourself?
Huh. I mean, to be honest, I have to say I'm quite surprised, even to this day, that certain things were allowed to stay in the book. But there was also a kind of process for me. So it was a difficult book to write. I can't really describe quite how difficult it was by comparison with some other books. And one of the things that happened several times during the writing of the book was that I would get myself in a complete muddle. I just didn't know where I was. And at those points in time, I would kind of sit down and try and distill the argument down. So that contents page that you're talking about, it came from a moment when I was in a complete mess. It came from a moment where I thought, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I don't know where I'm going. Why don't I try and distill that down into this what now is the contents page? And actually, once I'd done that, and several people said to me, that's incredibly useful, keep
Mm.
it, put it in the book. I got a little bit of pushback from the publisher, but in the end, I sort of persuaded them. I found another book which had done a similar thing, and then they agreed, well, there's precedent. It's been done before, so we're going to let you do it. But there's still bits, I mean, the prologue, as I say, where I kind of think, why didn't anyone stop me from writing that? I'm kind of glad they didn't. I really like it, but it is a very unusual sort of way to go into a book like this.
Yeah, I think without giving spoilers to those who haven't read the book, it also had a very surprising ending, honestly. But yeah, guys, I'm really sorry. I'm geeking out here a little bit because I do care about beautiful language. So one thing that I can say straight away, this book is going to probably rub some of your feathers the wrong way as well. I'm 100% sure because it talks about very important topics. However, I also recommend if you have like a long flight or a long journey somewhere, take it, read it. It does read so enjoyably. It's like it's an undercurrent work that's happening as you're reading it. You're like curious, but the processes of thinking, and in essence, it's a philosophical book, in my opinion. I hope you're okay with that kind of.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, I mean, I think that's great. That's kind of exactly what I wanted the book to do was to get to engage the reader. No, you don't have to agree with everything I say. Yes, some of it is really contentious, particularly in a sort of modern world view, and with so many contentious issues being thrown at us all the time. And yet, and this is a sort of a belief that I have in the process of writing, I wanted to be able to write that in a way that would engage people, draw them in, and allow them to enjoy the reading process itself. So I'm actually really pleased that you had that reaction to it.
Thank you. And for those who came here to talk about the care economy, I promise that's what we're going to talk about. I just had to, how Tim expressed himself, his playwright side in the book. I expressed my love for good language and for good narrative in the intro to this book. But you start the book like an academic does with definitions. Could you maybe, for people assuming that those who are listening to us, some of them wouldn't have read the book, what is the care economy? Really, what does it mean, and what is this book in essence about? Because I know it's deceivingly simple, but it also has so much nuance. I'd rather let you do that.
Yeah, I will do my best. So for quite a long time, my academic work has been asking one very simple question, which is what can prosperity possibly mean on a finite planet? And our conventional answer to that is prosperity is about money, it's about income, it's about wealth. And it's kind of that That's fine. It's taking us so far, but it's got some problems with it. As the economy gets bigger and bigger, we have a bigger impact on the planet, and that's undermining the prosperity of future generations. So it can't really be ultimately something that grows and grows forever and undermines the planet. Can't really be something that you'd call prosperity. So what might you call it instead? What is another metaphor, another model for what prosperity is? And this came from quite a lot of work going right back to that first book that I talked about, Prosperity Without Growth. Actually, when you ask people, when you interrogate the wisdom of the ages, the poets, the philosophers, or just ordinary people on the street, one of the things that comes out first and foremost is that prosperity is more about health than it is about wealth. Now, I was fascinated by that insight, and I began to think through the dynamics of it. If prosperity is about wealth, then it makes sense that we just accumulate and accumulate and accumulate. The economic growth, the allegiance of our politicians to economic growth, it all makes sense because more is better in that paradigm. But when you think about health, health has a very different dynamic to it. Health is never about having more and more and more of anything, really. Certainly, growth is important at certain stages of our lives, but actually, the only things that grow forever in the context of health are deeply damaging to the organism. So
Mhm.
health is the dynamic of health is very, very different, and it's very, very specific. It's much more about balance. It's about not
Mhm.
having too much, not having too little, about the attention to the point of balance and bringing ourselves back into balance. And this balance is really what we call health. And the
Mhm.
process of being able to bring ourselves back into balance is also a part of what health is. Now, where does care come into that? I mean, in some ways, it's very obvious that the people who help us to come into balance are quite often carers. But actually, when you think about it, it's even more fundamental than that, that this process of restoration to balance, restoring ourselves to balance, this restorative force,
Mhm.
that's what I mean when I talk about care. I almost define care as that restorative force that brings us back into balance, brings us back towards health.
Mhm.
And that's quite a powerful metaphor. It becomes a very different way of thinking about what we're doing in society, but it's very challenging for the
Mhm.
economy. The economy is not something that really likes the
But
process of care very much.
But on the other hand, there is an a business case in healthy society, and here I'm talking about not single individual, but if you take a society as uh, like as this system, I remember there's. I read in one 19th century novel, the sentiment is like, if my workers are healthy, they'll work longer hours and produce more money. And that was like 19th century. So is there a business case in health or in care economy?
Yes, there is. I want to distinguish, though, between that because the business case is roughly the one that you're quoting from that 19th
Yeah.
century novel. And it's some of where actually the roots of the national health system in the UK came from precisely that idea. If you have healthy workers, then your business works better. It makes sense. There's a kind of a double dividend, a win-win that you get. Healthier workers means more productive workers means more output means more growth. So there's very definitely a logic to that. But there's also, to me, a sort of limit to that logic
Mhm.
because if you only concentrate on the end goal of having
Mhm.
growth and wealth and prosperity in that conventional sense out of it, then you forget that actually one of the most important things in life is the health itself. So you're
Mhm.
doing that, you're pursuing the health of your workers, and it's a very good thing to do, don't get me wrong. But you shouldn't just be doing it as an end to this ultimate god of economic growth. You should actually be doing it because health is the most important thing, not just to human life, but to society as a whole. And that shift from thinking about having your eyes on the glittering prize of everlasting wealth and growth forevermore, as opposed to the thing that really matters, that core objective of human and indeed I would say planetary health as the
Mhm.
real objective. And the point is, you make different decisions if you have those different goals.
Well, planetary health, I guess, is quite clear that the more is not better. At least we've made it quite clear, although not everybody agrees nowadays.
Yeah, no, that's unfortunate, and particularly as Hurricane Melissa hits Jamaica with a
Yeah.
sort of winds of 185 miles an hour, and you kind of think, is this going to come more frequently? Is climate change really not something we should be worrying about? I mean, I am one of those who thinks that we do have to pay attention to those ecological limits, that our economies are much bigger than they used to be, and that we're already seeing some of the impact of that, everlasting growth meets finite planet that doesn't take a lot to understand the logic of it. But as you say, it is quite contested, that argument. And in a way, I suppose one of the reasons for shifting the metaphor towards something around the care economy is something that we can agree on. It's very difficult actually to argue against the idea that health is really, really important. And if health is very important, then it's very difficult to argue against the idea that our economy should, as far as possible, be about care, because that's what returns us to health. And
Mhm.
perhaps we should think about what it would mean if we took care as the center of the economy rather than growth as the center of the economy.
Oh, that is such a rabbit hole, and we'll go down there. I promise. If I forget, please, guys, remind me. What I wanted to ask was, I said, some of the ideas maybe will ruffle your feathers wrong way. We were talking about contested ideas. So you, as a person who actually does come from an academic background, in addition to everything else, maybe not a fair question. I have to be honest, because it's around the book. It's not in the book. But
Yeah.
do you feel that our society is getting further away from truth, from science, from things which are kind of should be obvious by now, and we start running in the other direction? Arguing with things which we have established, say, 100 years ago.
That's definitely been a trend over the last, I would say, 5 years to a decade. We have, we had in the early 2000s, for example, there was more or less a global non-partisan, it wasn't party political
Yeah.
consensus that we need to take something like climate change seriously because the science is so clear and we see the evidence unfolding in front of our eyes. And that's not where we are at the moment. At the moment, it's a very, very contested territory. You have people sort of, denying that science is important, undermining it, trying to obstruct any processes that might get us to take it seriously. And so it is, even in the years that I've been working around these concepts, I've sort of seen that ecological concern and that concern for scientific truth. I've seen it receding behind a sort of vision of deciding what to do, which is based upon, I don't know, military power or economic power or who shouts loudest in a Twitter argument,
Yeah.
X argument. These kinds of dynamics are now overwhelming what was actually an almost essential consensus around quite an important issue like climate change, like the loss of other species on the planet, which undermines our biodiversity, which undermines the productivity of the soil, which then undermines our food system, which leaves us tomorrow or the day after with a wrecked planet and no prosperity whatsoever. We have to be able to have those arguments, even when we don't agree. We should absolutely, definitely be looking at these issues because they are so critically important to, not just prosperity tomorrow, but prosperity today.
hmm But if you're talking about contested issues, and for those people who haven't read the book yet, it does take a fairly global look at care economy. Although obviously we are speaking in the Western world, but I do want to focus a little bit on US because it is a trendsetter in so many areas, and from former Soviet Union, what it looks to me in US is that even the idea that health is important, health is the wealth that should be ultimate goal, is a very hard thing for a lot of people in America because it like care or welfare or any of those words sound dangerously too similarly to what they're afraid of the most, socialism and communism. So how do we break through that? Because I think that even conversation is almost impossible if we don't agree on the premise that
Yeah, I
What?
mean, I don't think people aren't interested in health in the US. In fact, in some ways, some of what we've seen politically does actually indicate that there's a real grassroots movement that wants to kind of reclaim uh, people's ability to protect their health. And in some respects, I would argue even that a platform like Mind Valley is tapping into that because people want to be healthy. They want to live well. They want to know what that means. They want the knowledge to arm themselves with the ability to live well. And so that I think that is there. But you're right that there is a lot of opposition to it, and some of that opposition is actually from people who don't have our health or even our wealth collectively as that the center of their own interests, but rather a sort of the accumulation of the gains that you can get within an economic system, irrespective of the impacts that has on anybody else. And that's a difficult place to have the conversation. But I do think that at that root concern that ordinary people have for their own health is something that you can't underestimate that really.
Mm,
And let me just give you a sort of example of that in a way. We have in the US is typical of this. There is a health crisis. There's a crisis in particular of chronic disease and a crisis of what is called metabolic dysfunction, which is what happens to your body when you develop chronic diseases, largely as a result of a food system which
mm,
is deeply dysfunctional. Now, who
mhm,
profits from that food system? The people who make the ultra processed foods, the people who put the sugar in your diet, they are all running away and their shareholders are running away with profit. And that's contributing to wealth, to this growth that we say that we want, but it's
mhm,
doing so at the expense of people's health and people waking up to that and understanding that actually, if I want to be healthy, I have to shift my diet. If I want to be healthy, I have to eat real food.
mhm,
And if I want to be healthy, I have to be able to take control of that and have the knowledge to do so. That I think is something which has shown itself, and as I say, through Mind Valley, through a number of other popular platforms which look at people's desire for health and try to give them the information to pursue that goal. That's a very powerful force. It's something that I think is ultimately is able to stand up and say, to speak truth to power, to go
mm,
up against these powerful commercial interests that are undermining health, and to say we deserve a better food system, we deserve a better health system. Actually, we deserve something which allows us to take control of our health and be well,
mm.
and that's prosperity.
I am going to say something which I hope Mind Valley audience will forgive me for saying this, so don't tell anyone. But what I wanted to say is that thank you for the kind words. But I also feel that that system where we give responsibility for health into the hands of the individuals is a little bit unfair because not everybody has the resources and the means and then maybe even education or access to take care of their health. And maybe this is me coming from post-Soviet society where we understand that health, especially in the cases where it matters, should be to some degree guaranteed by the society where these people live, because those who need health the most are usually those who can't take care of themselves. So, and I know people asked that question: Is
Yeah.
this only about what's wrong, or does it give any solutions? But do you have any solution to this situation where right now only health conscious people can only take it in their own hands and that's all they can do?
Yeah, there's lots of solutions, but I just wanted to say I am totally on board with your point there, Christina. In fact, it's one of the most, for me personally at least, it's a kind of central part of the book, because I am, at a certain point in the book, I become a part of the story of the book, because
Yeah.
in the process of writing, I was diagnosed with pre-diabetes and then diabetes. I was a part of that that epidemic of chronic disease. But the importance of that, I learned two things from that. One was just how insignificant I am as an individual statistic. This is a population epidemic, a pandemic, really, of unprecedented proportion. So diabetes has doubled since the 1990s. In 30 years, 25, 30 years, this enormous rise in these chronic diseases. And so I learned that I was part of a global statistic. But the other thing I learned was when I tried to change it was how incredibly difficult it is. Yeah, I'm a person with good means. Have had a decent income. I'm interested in the subject area. I'm even writing a book about it, and yet it is almost impossible for me to change. With it takes effort, it takes time, it takes almost totally revolutionizing your own diet. It takes access to the resources to tell you what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat. It takes people to guide you through that. And at the individual level, you can do it. You can, with sufficient resources, do it. But your point is absolutely the crucial point, that you cannot expect population health to improve while you rely on the good resources of a few individuals who may just about be able to turn around their diagnosis. When there's hundreds of thousands, millions upon millions of people who are embedded in a system which is still systematically undermining their health. And that's the point, I think, which the book comes to, sort of somewhere in the middle, that this is about system change. It can be about individual change, but it must be about system change. It must be about calling out those bad behaviors that undermine our health, giving us the resources to improve our own health. It must be about the proper funding of care in the economy. It must be about not treating care as a second or third class citizen, but actually the very core of what the economy is doing. So to me, that's a sort of linchpin for the argument in the book, is that yes, you can change at the individual level, and the resources of Mind Valley itself is brilliant in terms of creating that facility for individual change, but it isn't enough in a system that's constantly making us sick.
Mm. Uh, just as a little random, my own experience, I remember when we were traveling through Yellowstone in US with the family in July this year. And Yellowstone is actually a very touristy destination with a lot of affluent people there. There were situations where I had to go to bed hungry because everything that was available wasn't edible. I'm also gluten intolerant, so that kind of made things much harder. But the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes we expect certain level of awareness of our population in general when there is no reality for them to even be aware that something else is possible. I mean, if everything around you is non-food, in my understanding, then what are
Yeah.
we talking about? It's like expecting a person to read a novel without knowing the alphabet.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's a brilliant metaphor, and I've done work here for a think tank that's basically trying to revise and revolutionize the food system itself. And one of the things we've done there is to actually go out to ordinary people to talk to them about their eating habits, their food, the food system as a whole, and they are totally shocked when they discover some of the way that they have been deceived into living inside a system that's undermining their health, and they want change. When you tell people and you show people what's happening, there is actually a real desire there for change, and the change has to happen at the system level. It has to, because, as you say, a lot of it is invisible to us. And there's a wonderful program I think it went out on the one of the public channels here last year, which looked into how ultra processed food had created a part of this food system which is now so dysfunctional. And they did it by making their food irresistible to us.
Yeah.
They looked into the neuropsychology of our own addiction to certain substances, and then they designed the foods to make them absolutely irresistible. And this is a part of a deliberate strategy to kind of
Mm.
mine health, to extract health in the form of profits to shareholders for companies who produce this food, which weaponizes our own psychology in order to create profit. And that, it seems to me, is exactly where a sort of growth-based mindset can lead us astray, and where we need to focus our efforts in relation to system change, because hoping that good-natured and goodwill people will change on their own accord, it just doesn't wash in the face of so much opposition against you.
As I said in the beginning, I'm not sure where this interview will go, but you just trigger so many interesting thoughts and ideas just from this interview. You just mentioned that the food is designed with neuropsychology in the basis to be addictive. But I was just recently reading a lot of apps are also relying on neuropsychology on creating addictive behaviors and sticking you, like keeping you in that vicious cycle. But that is influence on our mental health.
Yeah.
There is plenty of research that points to the fact that our addictive behaviors are usually the symptom of a disease, of mental health disease. So
It's very pervasive
yeah,
within our system that if you can addict people, you can draw them in. You want to draw them in. You want clicks, you want likes, you want time spent with the adverts, you want the revenue that comes from that because you're fixated on growth. You may not even clock that what you're doing is actually mining people's health. But it is really important because, particularly for a generation of kids and adolescents, people who are growing up with this new technology, which has been engineered to addict them to that process and is in the process of undermining their mental well-being. That's a recipe for disaster. That's a real time bomb waiting to explode, and we have to be wary of it. We have to begin to think about how to reorient the priorities which have allowed us to overlook that process of extracting from the health of the population in order to increase the profits of shareholders.
I'm going to do a little turn right now because I am oh my God. No, I'm not conscious of time, but I hope you forgive me. I did want to touch upon one topic, which you actually pick up in the book very early on. We were talking quite a bit about health right now, but the word in the title is care economy. And when
Yeah.
we talk about care, statistically speaking, it's a female world, and uh, there were pieces you mentioned that earlier in this interview, but this whole idea that this is this share of economy which is very often invisible, very often not accounted for in GDP. I have seen some studies where they showed that if everything, all the care work which is done very often unpaid and unnoticed, was counted for in a GDP, it would be a very different picture. And then there are you, the man. You mentioned that in the
Yeah,
very
yeah.
of your book, but how gendered is that whole bundle of problems?
It's massively gendered. It's massively gendered, and as you say, me coming to it as a man, it was one of those crisis moments. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I should be doing it. I don't know if I can talk about care as a man, because you say, and it's true. Statistically, it's true. Most of care work, as traditionally defined, is done by women, and a lot of it is underpaid. A lot of it is unpaid. A lot of it goes unnoticed. It doesn't count in capitalism, really. And we can talk about why. There's a really important reason to talk about why that is. But the reality is that has become very, very gendered. And actually, from very early on in our lives, we're almost socialized, as boys, to be kind of building stuff and running around with guns and shooting each other and having fights. And as girls, we're conditioned into this needing to be the caring, mothering, nurturing kind of people. And this division into these two places is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to kind of talk about care as a fundamental organizing principle, which is how I want to talk about it and how I talk about it in the book. And so I guess there's two things to say from that. One is absolutely this has been highlighted by women before me, and I talk about the work of people like Nancy Folber, who talked about the invisible heart. Adam Smith, that great economist from 250 years ago, talked about the invisible hand and how marvelous it was at organizing society in the best interests of the social good. And Nancy Folber just comes along and she says, hang on a minute, the invisible heart, the work of the heart, the work of care, this is going on almost unnoticed and has no place in the way we think about the economy. That's clearly wrong. And women have been saying that's wrong, in part because they are closer to, more vested in, and more troubled by the deep inequality that sits around care work and the paid care work in particular. And so, coming at that for me as a man was tricky, but, and this is the second thing I want to say about that, I think it's absolutely essential that we sort of ungender that we think about care as a fundamental principle. and that ultimately, we have to recondition ourselves, not just recondition ourselves, but I think that men in particular need to be able to claim a side of themselves that they were conditioned out of almost through our culture. And women also have to be able to say, no, at this point, I don't want to be your carer. I don't want to be the only person
Yeah.
who's caring. I want you to pick up the burden and indeed the reward of care in society. And so, I mean, there's a chapter where I confront that. I don't know if you want to say the title of the chapter in polite company, but it is a really critical part of the argument in the book, how we approach that. One of the things that I've found been most gratified by in the reception to the book is that it has been something that men have wanted to read. And
Mm,
I wanted to kind of not take this care economy away from women's rightful defense of it, but actually to say in part to men, this is something, guys, we have to pick up, because this is not just about the gender division. It's actually about being human.
mm. And I'll say something again, which is probably a little sacrilegious, but I think, unfortunately, in contemporary society, some thoughts have to be voiced by men for other men to just even pay attention and not to dismiss it as, oh, you guys again with your problems. I do want to full-heartedly also support the idea that we need some kind of homeostasis as a society, because as a single mother now, divorced, I know that if I was a little more feminist early on in my life, probably I would have lived a more fulfilled, less exhaustive, and maybe more happy relationships. So I think you're right. It's something which both men and women need a little more balance.
I've
In,
been I've been very drawn in the process of I totally sympathise with that. I think it's absolutely right. I was very drawn in the process. It's very gender sexism. The division between the sexes is so easy. It's so easy to fight the fight. And actually, we live in a, as you mentioned before, in a technological world which likes division because it can monetize conflict. So we find ourselves in our social media encouraged into that division. I was really drawn by the work of someone called Rianne Eisler, who is now in a just about 90, I think, and she's worked for a long time in the US. She was originally started out in Austria and ended up in the US, and has talked about what she calls a concept of partnership, that coming at that gender division through the idea that one or other gender, or whichever gender you happen to believe in, comes out on top, is a
yeah.
recipe for disaster, and that actually approaching that question of gender through partnership is one of the most profound changes we can make in society.
Thank you so much. For those of you who are interested in the answers, why is it like this and what should we do? I do recommend you read the book because we do not have time to go deep into everything. But I do want, I promise, to read out at least some questions. There is one question I wanted to read out from one of the readers. If you have questions right now, you can drop them. Maybe Masha will bring them up. But there was a question, let me just find which one, because there are a few, comes from Arietta. And she asks, is new book talks more about what we can do to get away from the money focus, or is it more about what we need to positively focus upon and how we impact this social change? So yes, that's a
It's
question. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it's a bit of both. There's it's very definitely about trying to deepen our understanding of why we've got into some of this bind. And when you try and deepen that understanding, there has to be a little bit of an analysis of what's gone wrong. But it is absolutely at the same time presenting what an alternative paradigm looks like, right from that core idea of prosperity as health rather than as wealth, and then following the logic of that through and thinking about what that means for the economy, what that means for care, and getting in the final chapter actually to some quite profound sort of policy implications. I don't dwell massively on the policy implications. I'm more interested in sort of analyzing the situation and drawing out that positive thread, that vision of something that could be different, and talking about why that's been difficult. And I sort of promised to talk about this before, and I haven't quite. But one of the reasons that care is so difficult within capitalism is that care takes time. Attention to the
Mm,
point of balance takes time, and devoting care takes time. Time is a kind of anathema to capitalism. Time is money. And so you want to extract it from the economic equation as much as possible. And that means that within capitalism itself, there's something systemic that is leading us away from care. And so we need systemic responses to that. And I talk about what some of those responses might be in the book.
I remember I highlighted one of the quotes about time, that caretaking time. I don't dare to try to find it right now, guys, but if I find it, I'll share it with you on social media at some point because it was a beautiful quote with that idea. I'll read one more question just to be a little bit fair. So there was a question from Madli, and you just mentioned policies, so I think it just works well in this context. Can we care better in economical sense in national smaller states or bigger states, unions and such, and why? So basically, yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I think if you think of if you think about the sort of the activities of care that we're familiar with, they are actually mostly local.
Yeah.
But if you think about care as this restorative force, when you're in this local situation, you're looking after someone, you're trying to restore health, you're trying to keep the balance of health. That's what you're doing in all sorts of different ways, at the micro level, at the individual level, the level of your family, the level of your community. But if you think about that kind of restorative care as that restorative force, that can operate at all sorts of different levels. I mean, one of the things I do in the book is talk about how actually, to some extent, and might seem a little bit weird, but the planets and the stars and the moon are engaged in an exercise of care because they're keeping us in balance in a way that is the only possible way we could have life on Earth, is because of this attention to the point of balance that's maintained by the stars and the planets. And in our bodies as well, the same thing is true. We would not have health in our bodies without this constant attention to the point of balance that we don't even know is going on. It's happening for us. Thanks to our own autonomic nervous system, we are continually being brought back into balance by this process, this restorative force. And so I think when you think about care that way, you can actually go out and say, well, if that's what care is, what would it look like in society? What would it look like in economics? And you can get from that small, local, I'm looking after my kids sort of perspective on care, right to the how do we organize our society to take health seriously? And it all revolves around that sort of central principle that care is a kind of restorative force.
Thank you for this answer. Thank you, Madli and Orietta and everyone who sent us the questions. I really appreciate that. I know sometimes people are watching these on their phone or in recording, so you don't get to ask your question or it's hard to type it in. So thank you for sending the questions in advance. We're going to stick to that tradition, Tim. This is the first time we actually ask for questions in advance and I considered them. Normally I talk so much that I never have time for any other questions, or I ask questions a lot. For those of you who haven't got the book, do get the book. If you want to go deeper and if you want to get the answers, because we scratched the surface, obviously. We only had 1 hour. The book takes us much deeper and covers so many interesting topics. We didn't even touch upon violence and wars, which is a big theme in the book, but I'll leave it to you guys. It's also a big theme in the contemporary society, unfortunately. What I
Maybe I
wanted,
could just say there that
yeah.
that is an important theme in the book for a really important reason. That, and this comes from one of those people who have critiqued capitalism through the lens of care. The idea that you can't really understand care unless you understand its nemesis, which is violence. And so, the idea that violence continually undermines our best efforts is one of the things that became evident in the distance between that point at the end of the pandemic when we were applauding care workers on our doorstep and that point just a few months, a year or so later, when we're moving into a totally different political climate that's rushing towards violence. And that's, to me, one of the reasons why this book is so profoundly important for this time. At first, I just thought, what can I do with this? What can I do with care in a world that's rushing towards violence? But when I adopted Kathleen Lynch's kind of, you can't understand care without understanding violence, it became so much clearer to me that this is precisely the time when we should be thinking about care and about care as an antidote to that prevailing climate of violence.
Yes, thank you for giving this explanation. So I do recommend you guys get the book and go deeper. I do wish we had more time so that we can actually, because the topics are super interesting, super important, and we only have 40 to 45 minutes, and as usual, I'm over time. But I'm going to ask the last question of Tim. But meanwhile, those of you who are watching it accidentally, sign up to Mind Valley Book Club. If you keep asking us, how do I join Mind Valley Book Club? Where do I pay? You don't pay anywhere. We do it for free. So sign up to our newsletter, sign up to our social media, and that's how you join Mind Valley Book Club. And once a week, I invite you to an interview. Now, last question to my audience, please leave a heart for my guest in the comments or in the chat. In the comments below the video is also good, or in the chat. And the last question to my guest, Tim Jackson, would be how. It's a bit redundant question, but it's my traditional. I ask everyone, how do you want your book to change the world?
Obviously, modestly speaking, I'd like us to produce something that's much better than capitalism, includes all the good things that capitalism has done, and takes us towards this care economy. A bit more modestly, maybe, I really hope that it stimulates these discussions, because and it's, to me, there's been a great conversation for that reason. I think they're really important conversations. It doesn't matter whether we agree with them, but it really matters that we engage in them. And so what I wanted for the book was for it to be a vehicle to help people engage in those discussions. And I think they're going to turn out to be really, really important as we go forward from the slightly conflicted world that we currently live in. These principles are ones that really matter.
Thank you for writing the book and for coming to our show. I really appreciate that. It was such a stimulating and thought provoking. Both the read and, of course, the discussion was, in addition to that, also very pleasant. So thank you so
It's
much.
been a real pleasure. Thanks, Kristina.
And for those of you who are interested, dive deeper with this book, get the book, read it. I absolutely agree. We have to at least start speaking. Nothing changes unless we start highlighting the situation the way it is. And it is a huge, overwhelming bundle of problems. But I do believe that maybe in some generations in the future, our grandchildren will get to live in a better world and be healthier. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I'll see you in November. Thank you, Tim, once again, and hopefully our paths will cross. And I wish a huge success to your book so that this discussion keeps going. Bye-bye.